back of my mind, and I went on from there. And I would like to say that I developed somewhat normally for a teenager after that. I did meet other people. I did begin to date as teenagers did. My family situation at the time was very turbulent because of a broken family. And I call it my mother humored me. She allowed me to have a relationship with someone because it was a controllable relationship. Because I had 4 younger brothers and 2 younger sisters, and I was needed to help raise them. I was allowed to date this guy, Bobby, and Bobby and I were allowed to have a relationship because, as I said, it was controllable. Mother had me home with the other children, taking care of the house and everything else. No one never told me about birth control. I guess they really thought that when you went home, you forgot how to have sex. I didn't. I wasn't happy the first time, but it became, as we've all grown, something that's not so bad after a while. And Bobby and I got engaged as a 16 and 20-year-old do, and we had sex, as a few of us have had. And the result was I was pregnant again. My mother's reaction to the second pregnancy was not to allow me to keep my child. My mother contacted the same people that had taken my first child, the agency, and made arrangements that I would be immediately put back in a home from with mothers. I was older. I guess I had a knowledge of some of the loss that I was going to experience. And in my heart, I really did believe that I was going to bring this child home with me and that I was going to be allowed to bring her home with me. I was very militant in the home. I was very nasty to them. I was very adamant that I was bringing my child home, and I was making plans to bring my child home. My daughter Diane was born on June 25th, and I was in the hospital room, and the nun came in the room, and I had made plans with my cousin the night before about she was coming home, we were having carriages, cribs, and what have you. So we had thought she was coming home, and the day that she was born, June 29th, I'm sorry, the day I was to be released from the hospital, I call it gangbanged by a bunch of nuns, social workers, and hospital personnel. I was sedated and taken out of the hospital after I had signed surrender papers. And my daughter was released that same day to her adoptive parents. It was very traumatic for me, and I'm sure that everybody can relate to that. I went through a period of about 6 months where I was very suicidal, that I didn't want to go on because I knew the loss that I had had, but I was able, with the help of someone, to suppress that, and I went on with my life. In 1980, out of the clear blue sky, someone asked me a question about my children. Well, my child, because nobody really knew about the second one, and it was then that I began the search. When I did my search, I went back to the agency and I requested every single paper that I had signed at any time during those 2 periods so that I could see just what exactly I had done. And I was really appalled to see the papers that were signed, that I signed, that many of you people signed. We may not have signed the exact same papers, but we signed permission slips for nurseries. We signed permission slips for care, that if our children, some of us signed papers that if our children were born and there were problems, that our children were going to be put into homes and be cared for. We signed financial agreements. We signed placement papers. We signed surrendered papers that none of us at any age could really comprehend or understand. My papers said that I gave up my daughter for the term of the minority. So I figured, well, hell, in New Jersey, 18 is it. So after 18, I had all the rights to do what I wanted to do. I think it's important to say about the papers that we signed. And we have to accept the fact, yeah, we did sign these papers, but I think that we also have to accept the fact that we did sign these papers, but we had our moms and dads with us, we had caseworkers, you know, we had religious people with us. We had so many people with us that understood what we were doing, and I don't think anybody ever tried to help us understand. And I know that as a somewhat more mature person, when I looked at those papers, I was just absolutely devastated to think that my family let me do that to me. But it's not the end of the world, and I know we can get hung up in the past, and some of us can't go on to the future. But I think that if you don't get over what happened to you, you learn to put it in its perspective, and you learn to go on. There's always going to be something painful that's going to come back to haunt us, but we can handle it because we're strong, and it shows by us being. And it's all right to cry, it's all right to weep, it's all right to have birthday parties on your child's birthday. I did that every year. It's all right to put out Easter baskets, presents under the Christmas tree. If it makes you feel good and it helps you deal with your loss, then it's okay to do it. Because nobody can tell any one of us how we're going to handle the feelings that we've had to suppress for all these years. And that's our defensive coping mechanisms. Yes, Louise.
Thank you. Thanks. I don't want to take up a whole lot of time, going through my story, because I want to hear everybody else's. But in thinking about what I was going to say, I just made a couple of notes. And first thought that comes to my mind when I see a title of a workshop like this, why I gave up my child. They didn't put the word choose to. Why did I choose to give up my child in that? And when I think about it now at age almost 43, when I look back, I think what I felt I had was maybe the myth of making a choice, but with the pressure from my family, they're very Catholic, and of course, the famous neighbors, we've all got them, right? When I start to chastise myself, and even worse, and start to, feel really guilty, what I have to say to myself is, Louise, you really didn't have a choice 20 years ago. Today it's very trendy, and I've tried to explain that to my mother, and to suggest, hey, Ma, maybe things have changed. And as she said to me, Louise, or I said to her, look at all the Hollywood ladies that, have children. She said, Louise, they're all tramps. So, yeah, what I guess I've tried to do is to try and have compassion for the 21-year-old girl that was in college who was pregnant. And when I really let myself think about it, and Kathy and I, had been real nervous about doing this workshop since Tuesday or Wednesday, whenever it was, what I wanted to make sure I said, because I don't admit it very often, is that I really am angry with my mother. And other women have said it to me. Marianne Cohen, one of the co-founders of Origins, wrote an article about the rage against our mothers in the Origins newsletter about a year ago. And I got to tell you that what I really feel like being able to do is to confront her and say, Ma, why didn't you help me? And then I'd like to say to the social workers, why didn't you let me know what kind of pain I was letting myself in for? I mean, I had no earthly idea, none. And it'll definitely be the greatest regret of my life. Also, there are no other grandchildren in my family, and the way my family's going, that may always be true. So when I think about my daughter, and that choice that I made, that so-called choice, it just has had so many repercussions. But I guess I would just end by saying that I try real hard to have compassion for the person that I was 20 years ago. And I say thank God for Origins, and thank God that I have the chance to sit here and talk with other birth mothers who always understand. So I would just like to pass it along. Yeah.
I just want to do a brief thing.
Sorry.
I had come across this. I'm taking nursing school, and I thought that when I had taken this particular chapter, it reminded me so much of us birth mothers, and I made notes on it. And it was the different ways that people have of adjusting and adapting to stress, and that's what we were under. And I figured the stress is surrender. We all have these built-in defense mechanisms that we use to cope with these different stressful situations. And I've done many of them, and I'm sure some of you have. And when I would find myself like this, I would say, gee, am I the only woman? Or, does anybody else ever feel like me? One of them was repression, where we involuntarily exclude from our awareness our feelings on the surrender experiences. And in some instances, birth mothers, myself included, have completely suppressed knowledge of the birth of their children. I would never acknowledge for years that I had 2 children, even though my body looked like the roadmap of Chicago. But I would never admit that I had it. And many other birth mothers did the same thing. They did forget what they were told. Suppression was another mechanism. That's being aware of your feelings but refusing to acknowledge them. And many of us have done that. Been made to feel like our feelings were unimportant, so we didn't really acknowledge our pain and our hurt. Another one was projection, and that's projecting our feelings or our actions on others. Blaming, the things that have gone wrong on everybody else. And maybe sometimes if there's a little bit of a blame in a situation, not taking it for ourselves. Denial. We all know that. We block out our events and our places. We deny and refuse to accept what happened. And one thing I found interesting was a reaction formation. That was a person uses this to suppress the reality of a situation and then behaves in ways that are the exact opposite of our feelings. We become Miss Goody Two-Shoes. We're the pillars of society. We're the good mothers who take our subsequent children to church every Sunday and make sure that they're the first ones in the first pew on their knees, and they know everything that's being told to them. Other feelings that we have are displacement, compensation, fantasy, and then finally, I think the most important is reversal, and I think that's where we all are now. When we start to really take control of our feelings and we start to go forward, and by doing that, we really start to heal ourselves. Now I'm going to move on.
Maybe we can do some feeling. There's no particular order, that anybody can talk in. Don't want to force anybody to say anything that they don't want to.
Comments on what we've said,
And then perhaps
reactions.
Could I just throw out a
Sure,
thing?
yeah, help us, yeah, really.
How about those who were in a maternity home as opposed to those who were in a private home of some kind? Experiences that the people out there.
I was in a maternity home, I'm sure a lot of others
They would
were
take a show
too.
of hands.
Oh, okay,
How many were in
yeah.
a maternity home? How many were in private?
Private home meeting,
Other than an organized maternity home situation?
other than the parents.
Or wage home or
How many,
whatever.
how many were at home, how many had their own apartment?
I can
Right.
share
Oh.
I can share a real interesting experience with my experience as a birth parent. Not only am I a birth parent, but I'm also an adopted. So when I placed my daughter, it was a thing of what I had from growing up as an adoptee. Well, I was placed with a very nice family, and I got to give my daughter a chance. I was stuck in an apartment in the suburb of Chicago. My parents were very old Italian. My mother didn't want anybody to know because it was not my problem, but it was now the family's problem. And they put me up in an apartment in the northwest suburb. My parents were my in-laws. My husband was in Vietnam.
Yes.
And that's as bad as when I was adopted, that my parents got killed you know, my father was killed in the war, and my mother died of a heart problem.
Broken heart.
Maybe it's the same thing, it goes on, and it's an evolution. And I can remember my mom telling me, don't be friends with the people in this complex. You don't want anybody to know. I mean, they've known me from Adam, you know, they became friends, I lived here, my dad supported me while I was here. And I think there is a big thing with a maternity home versus home, and dealing with your parents where there's other things that come into play. And now if you hear my mom 20 years later, she'll turn around and say, I never did that. She could have kept her baby. You know, so it's like there's an added thing that goes along with something like that. And I'm sure everybody who's in maternity homes heard different things that now, gee, we never said that, or this was never done, you know, there were experiences of that. And I think that's where now, with the AAC, and everybody, like all of us sitting here, as a group, start merging and changing, making it easier for those that have to give up in the future.
Other comments?
I can't remember your first name, I apologize, yes.
I'm sorry, I'm Kathy.
Kathy, you mentioned that when you come home with some family relative and also given birth to a child,
My aunt,
and
she lives 2 blocks away.
which is your cousin.
Yes.
Yes. Did you, in later life, like now, ever reflect back to where you conveyed your normal, natural, motherly instincts onto that newborn child?
I
Did you
had
find
a,
that?
I had a unique situation when I had my daughter. My sister Cecilia was about 1.5 years or 2 years old. And when I came home, my mother thrust her at me. And all the feelings of love and everything else that I would have given to my own daughter, I gave to my sister. For my cousin Paul, I could never look at him. To this day, I cannot be with my cousin Paul, and I can't be around my cousin Paul. And I feel like that's my problem. But it was too painful for me to be around him and see him. I realize that now because I would have been seeing somebody else growing up.
The reason I brought this up is because this made me think of a little piece of puzzle that came into my mind. My life, I'm a birth mother also. In fact, my daughter, I'm giving away my age, but she will be 35 1 week today. I still have my brother. My daughter was born June 2nd. I had a niece that was born the 30th of May, same year. So you see the real, 2-3 days there? This niece's parents, my mother and his wife, they come to visit me. In 1984, I had just become quite involved in research support groups, active recovery center. And I told my brother and his wife about my experience from almost 30 years ago. And he looks at me and he says, well, number one, they had total sympathy. I feel bad you went through all that all alone. That I was glad. Number two, he looked at me and he says, now I know why you didn't have any more children. That piece of puzzle I hadn't fathomed through. And then he looks at me, his wife, and he said, now we know, and I didn't figure this one out either, why you conveyed such strong maternal instincts on your niece, Marilyn.
I think we grasp on to
I
somebody
didn't
else.
even know I had done it.
I don't think it's a conscious act. I think it's a subconscious grasping. But I've heard it from so many people.
Interested to hear you say there's another member of the family that, you know, there's a baby close by there.
Yeah, but in my case, my mother presented me with my infant sister to
Mhm.
take care of and raise.
Theoretically the same.
But when I had my second daughter, the same aunt soon after had another child. It was a girl, and I was the godmother, and the child was named after me, and I reacted in the same way. I don't have anything to do with my godchild either, because I guess I realized it was a poor substitute.
Painful.
It's very painful. Has anybody else had that experience with putting your emotions onto somebody else?
I had a niece that was born 4 years later after I gave up my daughter, and as circumstances would be, and believe me, I had no idea this would happen, my husband and I wound up being her guardian in 1983, because my sister was incarcerated, and she was a real angry 12-year-old who had been neglected by her mother. And she told me that I was only doing this so that my friends would think I was nice, and that I really didn't care about her. So I stood up for that, knife through the heart. But as time went on, I realized I had transferred a lot of maternal things that I wanted to give my first child to my niece. And
I always found
real
it
strange.
interesting that none of us were ever given credit for having any maternal feelings. Our parents could have them, and our parents could have a dozen kids and love every one of them, but we weren't smart enough to love our own. Yes.
I think I went a little further than that. I had a cousin who, no fault of her own, lost almost permanent custody of some, temporary custody of her children. It was basically because they blamed her for what was going on in the home when she wasn't home with her husband, which doesn't have anything to do with what I did. But ironically, she had, one of her children was 7 years old, and only 3 days difference in birth, in the date of birth of my daughter. And I went all the way to Southern Ohio. Because I was a school teacher, I used all the, professional things that I could think of. They said afterwards, they couldn't even figure out why they let me take her out of there. I went into the agency, this was in Perry County, Ohio. I went into the agency. I said, I have an appointment to pick Sarita up at 4 o'clock at the children's home, which I didn't. I didn't know anybody at the children's home. I said, so will you please hurry up and sign these release papers so that I can get her, because I have to be back to Ohio, back to Akron. Well, we must have lost the papers, and it's this old courthouse, and they're going through papers. And Mrs. So-and-so isn't here today. Well, I knew the head of the department wasn't there today because I'd already checked. I said, no, look, I've come all the way down from Akron. It's ridiculous. The child's expecting to go home with me. Her home's already been torn apart, and the whole 9 yards. The bottom line was they signed the papers. I took the papers over to the home. I said, I've come to pick up Sarita. I'm taking her home with me. And they said, well, we don't know anything about it. Well, what's the matter with you? Here are the papers. The agency's already done the home study. No home study. It wasn't even the same county. The whole thing. Why don't you know these things? What's the matter with you? Well, gee, we'll have to check with so-and-so. Does anybody know where Mrs. So-and-so's at? I had already checked. The head of the home wasn't there that day. That was her day off. So they packed up Sarita and they sent her home with me, and I kept her for the approximately 2.5 years until I regained custody of her, with my blessings. So.
Right.
Snowball there.
One
Yes.
thing that I've thought about in the last, 10 years or so since I've been really involved, is the fact that we were all single, or most of us were at the time, and the fact is that if we had gotten pregnant and then gotten married, we could have kept our children. If we had been pregnant and our husbands died before the child was born, nobody would have asked us to give up our children. It's only the fact that when we went into the labor room and we had no wedding ring on and there was no white line from where a wedding ring had been, and said that those were the reasons why our children were gone. Now, and I know intellectually why I could not keep my child. I was in college, I was 19, I didn't have any money, I wasn't married, and I needed to finish my career. I had the neighbors were at my house at that time, and it wasn't for me. It was more for my parents, even though but the thing is emotionally, I don't know why. Emotionally, I absolutely do not know why I did that. I was 19. My father even called me when I was in the hospital and said, if you want, you may bring him home and I will help you. But that was a day after I gave birth. Why didn't he say that months before? But, and other people said too, how could I have given my baby to a stranger? How could I have done that? I don't understand that emotionally. Intellectually, I got it all down. I wrote.
You were giving it to the agency, and they had your confidence.
No, they didn't. They absolutely did not. I couldn't stand that woman.
No.
She was an old fuddy-duddy woman. I couldn't believe that she was going to take that child in her car, even. you know, and drive away. I had no sense that she knew how to touch him. I mean, literally, it wasn't that either. I don't know why.
Well, when we look back on it, we can sort of see how maybe things happen, you can see intellectually, but the thing is, things happened relatively, if you look at time, in a short space of time. And, you know, we look back and think, now, if I'd only had this much time, or if, you know, if I'd been a couple years older, or if I'd dug my heels in and stood my ground, based on some little conviction you had in your heart, or some desire to parent your child, but you're looking at your own family model and saying, well, I'll only be one parent. I don't have the security of a good job. I don't have the wherewithal to provide. Social services didn't come through and provide for single parents. You can intellectualize all of that now. And I think we're sometimes pretty hard on our parents. I know that my mom asked me 18 years later, after telling me, when I brought up the topic of my son and his adoption, I brought up that topic 6 months to a year after it happened, I was told, we go on, this is a closed chapter in our lives. And so it was, as far as my mom and I were concerned, a closed chapter until my son was 18. And she asked me one day, do you think that your dad and I pressured you? Or at that point in time, I couldn't be really open and honest with her. It was just such a shock to me that she even brought it up. And it was like 2 tons lifted up off me, just the fact that she even brought it up. You know, I went on to realize that we grieved alone separately for years. Okay? She grieved for her grandchild. And I focused my blame onto my parents, onto my mom, without them knowing it for years. And that had to, you know, I had to work that through and find how to, you know, diffuse that, how to get over that, and go on with some things. And part of that is, you know, really talking things out with mom and dad. But at the same time, to understand what they were at a certain point in time in their lives too. You know, in my case, it was mom had already had 6 kids. She was exhausted. This whole thing is like, in those days, blew the family apart. You know, how the church viewed these things, how society viewed them. There was no alternative explored with us, not what you want to call it explored. There was nothing ever presented to me other than the option of adoption. Nobody said you have to give your child up. Just that nobody talked about any other. I think it was always just
assumed you're going to give your child up.
So you know that's what's expected, and you want to make up for all the bad thing that you did. So you please, and you also acknowledge.
Look at the role
You're
models
young.
you had too.
Well,
Everybody
yeah,
else
right.
you know who was pregnant and had a baby gave it up.
That's right.
Nobody
Another
blamed
thing
you,
is,
so
I
you
didn't know
just
anybody
did what
else.
everybody else did.
I took a survey once and it said, before and after, you know, how did your parents treat you before you became pregnant, you know, and after, and it was so horrifying to me, I had to put my pen down. Because there's a list of things that you check, and I said they were protective, they were concerned, they were sensitive, and I got into the other one, I started, you know, caring, I checked. I got to the protection part and I couldn't check it. For up until that point, when I was going to make that decision, my parents were involved with every decision. They talked to me, they did all of that, and then this decision, the biggest decision, the thing that was going to impact your life more than anything before, and they were not there. And I can't believe, and it's not that I blame them, but the circumstances of that, of even their non-involvement, have complicated this even more. Because to come from a caring family and then all of a sudden to need that care most of all and not have that,
I think
is really
in
powerful.
working with families now, though, you see that the parents need so much care then too. And
Definitely.
they don't have the supports in place. I don't think my mom and dad knew of anybody else.
And we've talked about that. We didn't know how to talk. We
Yeah.
didn't know how to talk about it.
Families didn't
But they were
communicate then, did
still
they?
my mother and father. They were still my parents.
Maybe
They
we were
turned to
all
church
victims then.
Oh, yeah.
Parents, don't you worry.
Yeah, we all were.
Years ago, at least I can tell you, I came from a small town up in northern Minnesota. And the issue wasn't taking care of kids, and the issue was, I happened to run away. My parents didn't know I had a baby first. but several, many, schoolmates and whatever. The issue wasn't raising another baby in the house or anything. The issue was that you had sex outside of marriage, and you needed to hide that. And it had nothing to do with your infant, your child, your blood relation. It was hide the fact that we have this, slut-faced daughter, who goes in. That was a whole, up there. I can't speak for big cities, I can't speak, and so when people try to talk about the, I needed the protection, the issue was to hide the fact that, I did this awful thing.
I think a lot of the thing is the family that I came from, we were a close-knit family, and when I found out I was pregnant, I was, upset, naturally, but the father of my child, I was engaged to him, and so I thought, and later, of course, I realized through counseling that maybe this was my trap for him, but he neglected to tell me until the day I found out for sure that I was pregnant, that he had married someone else 3 months before. So I guess finding out later that he was a sociopath with no conscience, no guilt, maybe there was a little because he finally chickened out and had to tell me on the phone. But after my parents found out, I think it was a matter of avoidance. My mother is the type of person, and I see it more as I go on, that if you ignore something, it will go away. I mean, her whole life has spent like this. She never got a job because she might not feel good tomorrow. And and she used it. I don't think the woman's ever done a damn thing her whole life. She didn't really want to do it. That isn't much, because she didn't really want to do anything. But, they say, and I'm sure if my mother and I got into this now, which I finally just a few weeks ago wrote her a really down letter and let her know exactly how I feel, and I can't even talk to her. She would say, we were there for you. Yes, they were there. They were there when my daughter was born, and I remember waking up afterward. I had a C-section because she was breached, and I saw my father, my mother, and my aunt, who I was very close to, staring at me. And it's like, yes, they were there, maybe physically, but emotionally, they were not there. And it was like not talked about. And I guess I remember just listening today that at the point that I found out I was pregnant, I guess I talked about adoption because I didn't know what else to talk about. Nobody gave us an option. Nobody said you could get ABC or whatever. I mean, I had a job, but I knew it wasn't enough to take care of a baby. And at the one point, as my daughter was like a month old before I relinquished custody officially, I said I wanted to bring my baby home. And now my mother says, as she put up the crib, and as she went to buy things for the baby, and I asked her in this letter, what the hell did you buy? I never saw a thing. But then what she doesn't say, and plays very dumb about, is that as soon as I left the house and my father came home, she boo-hooed to him she couldn't help take care of that baby, and so my father said, your mother can't help you. What choice did I have? Maybe I had a choice. Maybe I should have had more guts. Maybe I should have stood up for myself. Maybe I should have said, the hell with all of you and left. I guess I feel that what I did for my daughter was the right thing. I felt it then, and I guess I feel it now. Maybe it was the best for her. Maybe I would have been a terrible mother because of these other things, or maybe I'm trying to convince myself of that, so that's my denial.
I think we're all victims, though. I think parents are victims. I think it depends upon when we had our children. I mean, I conceived my daughter in 1969. She was born in 70. 71, everybody had their kids. I mean, there wasn't this
1 year.
There was this mask of kind of thing.
I had mine in December of 70, and
And I think it depends. I think it's how you treat it, not only in the hospital too. Whether it be in a hospital. I was put on a word at the end of the thing. It was like everything was fixed with the lawyer because I was going to take my daughter out of the hospital. And these nurses knew, and they were, we don't want you with other people. I was going to take her out. They did on her crib do not show.
yeah,
I was livid. I was livid. I mean, the craziness that went on with it. And I think we have a tendency. My mom was up there. She said, I was it, and I said, look, I wanted her to acknowledge the baby.
Well, and what they thought was for our own good
Yeah.
was actually to dehumanize us and made us feel
Exactly.
less
But
than what we were.
It wasn't until my adopted dad died, and my mom told me, she said, you don't know it, but your father held your daughter. Your father held your daughter. What they did was they tricked me at the lawyer's office because I was supposed to go sign the papers at the court. I had to have a judge there, and my brother and I went and left my parents with David, and I handed her over to some lady. She was gone by the time I got back, and I felt tricked about that. And I found out my father held her, and they both cried. They could not look at her because they did not want to give a gift. And I don't hold the feeling to them anymore that I did years ago, and it was always don't tell anyone. And then when I went public and had my picture plastered over the Chicago Sun-Times, I heard from my brother, believe it or not, why didn't you ask permission?
To keep in the paper.
No, it was a real interesting kind of thing, and it changed my name in it. The people who knew me knew who it was. And needless to say, we met by my daughter because we have to put a plea through an agency, through the county agency now, because I found I lived a hereditary disease. And I wanted to save her life because it could be real sticky. And they called the adoptive parents up, and 4 years ago I made contact with the adoptive parents. I still mourn because of the fact that she wants nothing to do with me. But I did what I had to do, and I felt that, I think that everybody, all of us as birth parents, have this tendency to blame. We did wrong, we did wrong. There's different reasons everybody has. And if you take the whole group together and ask each individual person, it'll be a different reason. Why did I give my child up? Do I resent it? Do I regret it? Do I blame my parents? I think that probably was the thing to do. Giving credit to a lot of the groups that we have in this organization, and getting out to the social workers, and dealing with what was done in the past, so it won't happen again. Open adoption, open records. I think you can't go through life, all of us, castrating ourselves or hitting us on the back and saying, we did this or we did that. I truly believe it's going to change.
Yeah, I wanted to share something that might help you too. One of the girls that's in my weekly group, I have an adoptive birth parent group, and when she first came into the group, it was because she had a intermediary situation with the adoptive parents who had contacted the agency wanting some contact with the birth mother. And so she came trying to cope with that situation and deal with it. And one of the things that she said in the first couple of weeks that she was in our group was how much she knew that she had nobody to blame but herself because it was her decision. She knew she was old enough, she was 19 or 20, and it was her decision. Nobody made the decision for her, and she was going to stand by that. 3 weeks later, she was reduced to tears to realize it really wasn't her decision at all. She was doing exactly what everybody wanted her to do without saying a word like she always did, because she had always been a dutiful daughter who had done exactly, by even saying nothing, they were already telling her because they didn't say it's okay to keep. They didn't say anything saying it's your decision, and that placed her in such a position saying it's my decision. That means that they really want me to give her up, or give them up.
Well, I think, and maybe this is true of other people, that I go through all phases. I've been there, and I've been to, it was what society did to me, and I believe all of it. It was what society did, it was what my parents weren't there for me, it was my decision, because I signed those papers. And I think that's the one that I'm really working on right now, is that I did do that, because and I will talk to my son about it, but hey, he's not ready to do that yet. How did he feel? Because I think that's what's most important. Does he feel abandoned? If he does, then I better get used to that, because that's something I need to address too, because indeed I signed those papers. Nobody drugged me, in that sense. So I think we have to get used to a lot of different things and walk around, and if it feels comfortable, then it's,
I think you had your hand up first, I think.
Just a quick comment in here. Maybe this is why they revise our dictionary year after year, because there was no such word as single parent in the dictionary.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I signed the papers, but I signed them only because I didn't have any other way of handling it about keeping my child. I didn't have any other choice, so that was the only choice that was sitting left, was sign the papers on the desk. I didn't have any money, I was doing good to get enough money and to pay for my own one room where I was living with a family, let alone pay for an apartment, to have a baby in the house. So I know that, by me signing the papers, I don't really have a problem with that, of
laying anything on myself about that, because I only signed them because I had no other choice. And then also about, I've heard it brought up about abandonment, that issue lately in reading in the Cub newsletter, and that, I'm not even gonna let that, lay that on myself neither, because my son or, anyone could tell me for the rest of my life, well, you abandoned your child, and I have enough belief of conviction in myself to know that I did not abandon myself. They could preach it to me for the rest of my life, and it's still not going to make me believe I did, because if I were going to abandon my child, I wouldn't have went through all the, I believed the adults, the minister and the social worker, and I did what I felt was the right thing to do at that time. And I'm not going to lay certain guilt trips like that onto myself.
I don't think it's a guilt trip so much, it's how we learn to live with our feelings about ourselves, because we did in fact do that. For myself, like I said, I was suicidal. I could not handle it.
Got a show of hands on that one.
I mean, really. And you say to my mother, well, Kathy was going to kill herself. She'd say, not her. Because they don't give you credit for the tremendous, tremendous feelings that it was.
I don't think they want to face it.
Face it.
Maybe, I don't know, knowing my mother as that kind of person anyway, I don't, maybe this sounds cruel, but I can't give her the benefit of the doubt to be that caring, not to want to face it. I mean, my sister's first child is getting married next month. He's her godchild, her grandson, and she doesn't feel well enough. Now, we're talking about a woman with arthritis here. We're not talking about a major thing, a minor heart problem. She will not go to her grandson's wedding in Tennessee because she might not feel well, and this is no joke. And because what she hasn't said to my sister really is, I don't like your son, but she doesn't like her grandson because her grandson doesn't kiss her fanny. But this is the kind of woman she is, so I don't think she's got enough caring in her body to just, not want to cause a problem. But they do not want to face it.
I didn't tell my mother I was searching, and I didn't tell her I'd found until 6 months after I found my son, because I knew she'd be against it. She's always, the past is the past, please don't deal with it.
Heard that too, yeah?
But I sent her the pictures of my son, and she said for 3 days she walked around 10 feet off the ground, experience that we all have had and found our kids alive and well. And then she said she went into the deepest, darkest depression she could ever remember in her entire life for a week. She felt her loss around that. And I'm really glad that she let it in, and we're slowly trying to talk with it. She's gotten the Birth Bond book, and this other book, Ended Beginning, and I mean, she's in Florida and I'm in California, and it's a good thing there's a distance. But we've made a commitment that we are slowly going to talk about this. It's hard. I think it's really hard for them to take in their part in this whole thing. I mean, I don't want to heap a huge amount of responsibility on her, but she did not participate as a caring adult in the situation.
I listen often. I think you're the first person I have heard with a situation like mine, where my father, who was a lawyer, offered to move to a different city, take a different name, start his practice over again if I wanted to keep my baby and support me. It's just like,
Yeah, look at the sacrifices he's making for you.
but it's troubled me for years, because if that puts on me, then I'm really the unnatural one. And, how could I be so unmotherly and unwomanly to just say, no, here, give it away. And so I envy some of you whose parents said, no, you bad little girl, you have to give that kid away, and I'm going to make you do it, because they took the responsibility and, left you a different approach. No, less painful probably, but it looks better to me.
It feels to me like they heaped a lot of shame on you.
To change the name you moved?
Yes,
We'll change your name.
You were so
You can have
awful.
one.
It's okay, we'll do that for you.
1960?
No, it sounds like they put you on a field trip.
Yeah.
Well, I knew what the answer, I mean, I understood that I wasn't supposed to say okay.
Yeah.
I also understood that if I had said okay, they would have done it. They, my father didn't say something unless he meant it. He would have done it, but, it's like when you say, hi, how are you? You expect the person to say fine, you don't want to hear about if they, have hemorrhoids or something.
Oh,
Thank you for that observation, that was very useful.
She wanted to envy somebody whose parents were against it. You're gonna envy me the rest of your life. When my mother first found out that I was pregnant, she said, well, obviously I'm pregnant. I have my doctor will find a place somewhere in another part of the country. He'll send you there. But Mom, I love my baby's father. We want to get married. The whole 9 yards. No, are you kidding? Those people. We are from the first family. I want you to all know this. I want you to be impressed. We are documented. We are with the Historical Society. We are among the first families of Ohio. Can I give up your excellence? Thank you. They sent me to Kansas City, Missouri, to the Willows. So Willows is, you had to be there. There's no way anybody can explain this place. It's like a mausoleum that somebody put beds in. Instead of, the upright. My parents, my mother didn't drive, or she would have done it herself, but my father drove, my mother all along, Now, you have to understand, we're telling everybody that you are with your Aunt Hilda in Des Moines, Iowa. Well, we all hated Aunt Hilda. So why there? I don't know. I guess because they thought they'd find out somebody knew they went in that direction. So that would cover that. They got me out there, and they're sitting there, or in this. Well, she got the first half of it right. They came from a good home, and sure as hell didn't go to one. But she asking, this question, that question, something else. Now, here's my mom, okay, who's most concerned about the fact that we're from the first family going on. And here's Dr. Hardy saying, oh, well, this baby, no problem. We're going to give this baby the best parents, possible. Oh, my goodness, it's wonderful. Look at the background, the pedigree, 14 feet long. And then she asked me, she said, and it was kind of funny that she asked me this question because she was asking my parents most of the other questions, but she looked at me and she said, now, just exactly what nationality are you? And I said, well, I'm German, and I'm English, and I'm Irish, and I'm French, and I was all these things. And then I said, to my mother's horror, but it wasn't a lie, it was something I'd learned from my father's side of the family that my mother didn't even know I knew, was that I was also Cherokee Indian. And Garnet Howard, this is Missouri, and they're sending these kids out west. That's like, it's like saying this is a minority baby that nobody wanted that's been laying around for years. Oh my God, well, we can't write that down. We'll just leave that out. So then, okay, the interview is over. They were going to show us where we were going to stay, right? Well, there was a place, my parents really, they might be first family, but they weren't first family as money was concerned. So they expected me to work my way through this unwed mother's home. There were places you could stay, and you could do cafeteria work, and work the laundry and all this stuff. And then there were rooms where you could share with somebody and pay, but you didn't have to do any work. And then there were rooms where you could be by yourself, and do your own thing. And of course, those were the most expensive. So we're going, and my parents fully, I'm sure my father fully believed I would agree to wash laundry as, for the next 8 months punishment. We're looking at those rooms, and I said, no, not interested. And the rooms why you had to share with somebody. I'm not sharing with anybody. I got my own room at home. It was just fine. I didn't want to leave it. I'm not sharing here. So we go down to the next most expensive rooms, and my father and my mother are getting really upset with me. And this section, Garnet Howard, this section has its own TV. And this section gets to sit at the head table in the cafeteria. You don't have to sit with those other girls. You get to sit, you get your own TV, and you get to sit at the head table. I said, if I have to stay here, this is where I'm staying. And then I sat down on the bed. Well, I thought they'd take me home because it was going to be too expensive, right? No, wrong. So then I did this really stupid thing. Now, please, I know you girls probably did some foolish things, didn't really mean to hurt your babies, but you did them. But wasn't thinking so much about hurting my baby, and so I thought maybe I'd hurt myself. So the next thing I did was I promptly threw myself down 3 flights of stairs and proceeded to fly. I figured, oh, my mom's not going to leave me here now. I mean, you know, I'm the child that she rushed to Children's Hospital with a nosebleed or a cut on the arm. She sure as hell is not going to leave me in Kansas City, Missouri, spotting, you know, and my 4th, 5th month pregnancy, right? Wrong. My parents went out to eat. They said, we're going to go out to eat. We're going to find a motel. We'll stay there. We'll call in the morning, see how she is. I'm standing there going, I don't believe this shit. So, next morning they called. I didn't know. I assumed they called because I didn't hear about it. But they must have said I was just fine and I had stopped spotting, so they left and that's all I knew about that. Well, they made sure, number one, that I didn't have any money so that I couldn't leave, because I fully intend to leave. But 55. So and I'm not good at directions, so I was afraid if I started walking, I might end up in California, and that wouldn't help me any. So my next idea was, since I didn't have any money and I didn't know which direction to go to get out of Kansas City, Missouri, my next idea was that I would start writing letter writing campaign. And of course they whisked me out so fast, they had no idea where I was going, so I had no way of telling my daughter's father where I was at. So I started writing letters. I wrote Kenny a letter, that's her father. I wrote a couple of aunts that I knew would be sympathetic. Obviously they were sympathetic. Their daughters had babies, they weren't married, and they got to keep theirs, so I figured they'd be sympathetic and they'd help me. Letters to the parents of my friends. You know, all sorts of letters. And I didn't hear from anybody. And I thought all of a sudden the whole world had deserted me. Well, I found out later my mother had made arrangements that my mail would all be directed to her. So basically, I bought them all the way. Really nasty. Wouldn't sit at the head table. I was supposed to sit at the head table. Remember, I was elite. I sat with the peons. Mainly because one of the girls there could really do the dirty boogie, and who's ever seen a 9-month pregnant girl do that dance, you'll never forget it. It's true. I mean, I guarantee it. It's more fun than the Chippendales. So then I finally went into labor. Okay, I go into labor in the morning, and I figure, well, pain's not too bad. Okay, I'm not going to tell them I'm in labor. I'm going to get you delivered right there in the home. But if something went wrong, they send you to the hospital. So I figured, if I can get them to send me to the hospital, I can tell the hospital I've been kidnapped. So I don't tell them I'm in labor, and I'm in labor like, you know, forever. And I'm not telling all the other. Finally, one of the girls thinks on me. She says, I'm going to tell if you don't tell, because it's ridiculous. You're going to end up having your baby in the middle of the floor. So that was Saturday morning. Labor started Saturday morning. I had it Sunday night. And the social worker was there bright and early Monday morning with papers for me to sign. And I said, I'm not signing, go to hell. So she left. And then I got thinking I was kind of hungry. And I wanted to see my baby. And well, I already knew from other girls who were going to see babies. And they told me that until, and you have to realize this mausoleum's like, I think technically it's probably 5 stories high because it was like split level 18th century stuff. I'm way up here. Oh yes, well if you want something to eat, you have to go downstairs. If you want a tray brought up, you have to sign papers. We went through this for 3 days. I had nothing to eat, I had nothing to drink for 3 days. I was 17 years old. Finally she brought the papers in and I signed them. So, right, I surrendered my baby. Here, you can have it. After that, and not hearing from anybody, you know, they sent me a plane ticket, I came home. I got off, I was never allowed to smoke, of course, you know, it's bad for you even in 1955. So I thought, you know, I've got to at least prove to them that I'm still going to rebel. I got off the plane smoking a cigarette, and my mother goes, you never did learn anything, did you? Basically, I don't want to go through in here, because I have in some of the other meetings, so I don't want to go through the part about searching for and what happened, because it wasn't good in the whole thing. But I do want to share, I told somebody last night, and I said I was going to share it with you, because it was too private. But maybe for those, can I can I ask a question? I see a show of hands of how many of you still have some even casual, general, hi, how are you contact with birth father?
Or marrying them?
Or including marriage. I would assume that's yeah. How are you? Yeah. Okay. I have always been in contact with my daughter's father. One of my best friends got involved there. One of the reasons he told me, well, we found out later after we got through fighting for the next 20 years, that the reason he didn't press my parents harder to marry me was because my best friend had, quote unquote, confided in him that it wasn't his baby. I was supposed to be my best friend, that's another whole story. Well, actually, she wanted him. He found out about a year ago that he doesn't know where it all live. At Christmas time, he gave me a gold chain that I have around my neck. And he said, it's like a top. And the gold ring that I should around your finger every time.
Can I break in with an observation? I'm sitting back here kind of watching the room as she's doing this, and you kind of wonder what everybody else is feeling. I did this workshop yesterday. Okay, I did this workshop yesterday, and I am a person who lives and works out of sarcasm and humor, and could not do that workshop straight. I had to put so much sarcasm. I've never done the workshop before. It was so painful to me, and I watched her, and I thought I was watching myself, and it was as irritating as hell to watch all that humor that she was putting into it. And I know she's so deep. I was waiting for this, because you could see the pain and why she has to cover this up with all this funny shit. And then you look around the room, and you see some of you wouldn't have cracked a smile in here because your faces would have fallen. It hurts so bad, even to listen to the jokes and the humor about this, and try and see that if we don't laugh about this, we're never going to get through it. And then watch some of us laughing at it because it's funny, the way she's presenting it.
This is healing what's going on
Yeah.
now. This is a big.
But we've all been there. We've all been in that home, and we've all done retarded things. I mean, I put rollers in my hair and refused to take them out until they threatened to cut them out. I mean, we've all done things to be defiant, to assert ourselves, and we got squashed. We got squashed and we got deserted. I mean, she's right. She got deserted by her family. She was deserted by her boyfriend too. And we were all, anybody say, hey, where is she? She's gone. You know? I mean, nobody
Funny thing
really
is, some of the
cared.
issues that you think you've really gotten resolved, which somebody said they hated these issues, they hated the word resolved because nothing ever really does. The thing that finally cracked her up is something she probably hadn't thought about for a long time, and all of a sudden that's the thing that really got her. The same thing happened to me yesterday. Something about my sister, who was 5 years old, bringing me flowers when I was in maternity home. I couldn't even say it. I had never even said it to anybody before. I could not get through the sentence. And I mean, I've been working on this for years, and it always amazes me. 10 conferences, 12 years into this, and you think, wow, I got a handle on this. It's never done.
One of the hardest things that I did for my, the daughter I surrendered, the younger daughter I surrendered, after I found her, of course I introduced her to my family, we had the family reunion and everything else, and then I found her birth father, and he hadn't known that she was born. He hadn't known about her. He had gone somewhere else at the same time, and I initiated a reunion with them at my house, like a family reunion. And one of the very hardest things that I have to face are all those family pictures that we took of Bobby, Diane, and I, because that's my family. And I can look at that and I can see where we would have been today. You know, and I got robbed. I flat out got robbed, and I know that. And I carry that picture in my wallet all the time because that's my family.
I would like to talk about being robbed, because that's a real big issue that I feel, that because I had to deny such a big, huge fucking chunk of my life, I feel like I was robbed of all those years. I was denying, who I was, what I was feeling, that pisses me off.
It should. It should anger everybody in this room.
And it doesn't stop there, even after, for some of us that have found. I found my daughter as a minor. She's now legally in the state of Illinois an adult and wants nothing to do with me. I led a good life. I'm in law enforcement.
And you say, why can't I have something
And
good?
God is my witness. If you could hear the adoptive mother talk, I mean, I've been involved in this kind of thing for a long, long time. Hear the birth mother talk as a person's family. My daughter was a victim of rape. I was raped, drugged and raped. I don't even know which one of the guys was gang raped. So I think, what I remember. Needless to say, her adoptive mother, please promise me that if she ever wants to talk to me, never tell her that she was a victim of rape. Why the hell not?
You've had to separate the issue.
Why the hell not? And I resent the fact that I have never talked to her. I have never been able to send a letter to her because I respect the adoptive parent. Because I've been involved in it in all different ways in the time. And now she has a half-sister. I was fortunate because with my half-sister, when I found my birth mother, it took her 6.5 years to tell her daughter. And now I have a relationship, if you want to call it a relationship. She's a friend, she's not a sister. It's a whole different family. And I know what you're talking about, family.
It's hard to, you know, for a lot of us, some of us have good reunions, some of us have bad reunions. And it's very hard to sit sometimes and hear somebody say, well, gee, I have a good reunion. Well, listen, I do have a good reunion. My daughter and her mother spent Mother's Day weekend at my house, and it was wonderful. But it was also painful, because Barbara and I talk about our children, and Barbara's talking about my child, and I have to listen to her. And I've resolved a lot of my issues, but the pain is still there, so that, you know, when you look at somebody who's got a good reunion, you think, oh, gee, shit, why can't it be me? It's not all roses. There's always something there that's going to be a reminder of what we've lost.
How about your period every month, or every time you ovulate?
Yeah.
It all comes back up.
How about when anyone fills out an employment application, there's a year in your life missing there?
This whole weekend of the conference, I didn't feel like there was anything that was getting to me until this morning when Mary Iwanek gave the talk with, by herself. And when she said towards the end of the lecture about how she and so many in New Zealand in their group were striving to keep families together. And that just, you know, I'd been doing so good, you know, and that just really hit me when she said to keep the families together. And I thought, you know, we didn't get to keep our families together.
Nobody acknowledged that you were a family unit.
No, I know,
True.
I know.
That's sad.
I know.
None of us do.
I don't care how much you've dealt with it, how much counseling you've had, how much you've worked through. I don't think there's a day of my life that I don't ache. I'm not saying I have a bad life. I'm very happy with my life. I have a wonderful husband. I never had any more children. And part of it was my choice, but part of it wasn't. But I don't think there is a day that goes by that I don't hurt. And I mean, it's like I kind of know now there's nothing I'm going to do about it. I just got to kind of go with the flow.
Yeah, picking up on that and what you said about being robbed. Yeah, not having any other children and probably never going to. I often get asked, do I have any children? And we talk about this at Origins all the time. You know, what kind of answer do you come up with? Because I often will stop and say, and depending on who it is, either one or none. But the other part of it is being 43, not having any other children, not being married. I find it very difficult to live with what I perceive as that loss. And you know, there are other parts of my life that are
that are fine, but that's just such a void, and that's why I'm always so, interested in talking to other birth mothers that don't have any other children. Does anybody have any, suggestions
Well, not
as to what to
suggestions,
do?
but one that hit me right between the eyes was when I was in therapy for a year and really didn't, I thought it was marriage counseling, but it turned out every one of my problems had to do with relinquishing my son. It was interesting. But anyway, one of the issues that came up, and it hit me without going into a long story, but that I did it myself. I set it up. There were circumstances around this, but she said, well, isn't that interesting how you, actually, I guess I said a lot of it, but that 35 at that time happened to be a magic date based on what my gynae was telling me and all that. Said that you set it up so that you would stay married till this age, not work through any of this, so that you could make sure that you never have any other children and you can punish yourself for the rest of your life. And it was like, yeah! And it's true. It's absolutely true. I did it to myself, not consciously, not a bit consciously. If somebody would have asked me, I would have said I wanted more kids. But this way, I could really do it on myself.
Then what do you do with that knowledge?
Well, for me, I immediately started to search for my son and found my son, and a whole bunch of stuff was resolved when I found my son. There is not the need or the want, or, I mean, I don't say want like I don't want kids, but it vanished when I got my son back, and it just absolutely was left as fast as it was.
Okay, had there been any other?
We had a one-time birth parent group that we started a long time ago, it seems like forever. With these conferences, it's real interesting because you will see repeats as you go. For those of you that are attending the first conference, you're talking to some of the people today that we haven't seen in 10 years. And I'm going to make light of it for a lot of different reasons because I'm talking to the adoptee also. They've had a conference, you meet an adoptee who's searching. Okay, I have a dear friend Anita who found her daughter, it must be 10 years ago. And at the time, I was not looking for my daughter because we were having whole thing about minor searches, and I was just finding my birth mother. My birth mother didn't want really to have anything to do with me, and her husband got involved, which is not my birth father. And I used to watch the pain on Anita telling her story that she has, I'm a God-fearing woman. I never had children. I gave her a gift, I made her a sweater. I sent her a birthday gift, and she sent back. This was the daughter that she found. And I looked at her and I said, Anita, would you be my mother? And it's real interesting because my first convention was way back when in Kansas City. I met Katie Sanders and a couple of other folks. Got into a lot of greatness at the convention. And we did this at that time too. And we became friends with people. After I had my daughter, I was told I could not have children. I dealt with that. Fortunate enough for me 11 years ago, I had what was Miracle Baby. And she made it okay. And after her, I lost one and I lost another one. But out there somewhere is my 20-year-old who now knows where I am. And I've had to turn around inside of myself and say, okay, I have to live with it. We can berate ourselves to the blue face. My dad, God rest his soul, told me, we'll forget about it. We got worse. And I look at people who were on the delivery table and made to sign papers. All the injustices that have been done to birth mothers throughout the world for all of creation. You have to come to grips with, we live, as you said, from day to day. Each time it changes. Every time there's a new thing that comes in. And today I'm having a real hard time separating between the adoptee and the birth mother. Because I'm feeling your pain as the adoptee looking for the birth mother and not getting that from my birth mother. And then I'm feeling the pain because I have a child somewhere out there who doesn't want to have anything to do with me. And then I hear, the other stories. And I see someone who is like me, or was like me years and years ago, to make the funds, and to watch, as I said, the Barbara, look at everybody else here. There's so much pain, so much different variety that's coming out. When Barb has a relationship with her son, and I was jealous of all hell with her. Now Keith's getting married, and she's not invited to the wedding. And I know as a best friend, she's hurting like hell. And I mean, it goes up and down, you know. And I feel bad for the adoptees who search and get rejected, and worse for the birth parents who search and get rejected. But all of us have to live with that, and you take from other people, and you draw from other people. And it's a hard road, and it's not going to end, and it's not going to stop. The hurt and pain that, like you say, goes on every single day. It's not going to go away, but you learn to live with it. You learn to blame people, but you learn to live with it. I don't say I don't get pain every day. And my children were all born in July. All of them, including the twins.
What are some positive things that anybody's got any ideas on that we can do with it? I'm sorry.
Go everybody.
I was surprised to see so many women that hadn't had other children.
Yes.
I had four children. But the thing was, I thank God I got each time I had a baby, it was like a postpartum depression, I think. But it was not understanding. You know, when you saw a therapist, usually they would just tell you, this is a door that's closed, and just don't even think about it. But my husband wanted so much to have children, and I did too, but I was afraid. I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to take care of her. I was afraid that I might hurt her in some way, or neglect her, or just felt inadequate in taking care of her.
I've heard that a lot from a lot of the girls who come to our meetings in Jersey.
So we had the children. There is a good side to this. This 5 years ago, my daughter located me. She's in California. And it's been a good reunion. It's been, my husband was extremely supportive, and I think that was a lot of the secret of all of it. He said when we had the babies, and he knew how I had told him about it before we got married. And because I felt, you know, it was unfair to spring something on my son later. And in fact, I talked to the psychiatrist, and he said he couldn't tell me whether I should tell him or not. This was before we got married, but he said my experience has been telling the truth is always better for him. And on that basis, I decided to tell him before we got married. And I think it was such good advice that I got, because and I told him, I said, don't ever bring it up because it's just too painful to talk about. So when I was having problems after the baby was born, he said that he felt like searching himself because he knew what the basis of it was, but he didn't do that. But then when she found me, he says, this is like a miracle. And it is. You know, it's just really been such a wonderful experience. There have been ups and downs, you know, things you're adjusting to other kids and, you know, their sibling rivalries and jealousies and things like that. It's all been there. But I would say my husband hasn't shown these signs of in any way resenting. He always makes her feel so welcome when she comes and just really gives so much support. But it's just really, the relationship is growing, and it's been such a wonderful experience. I'm just so grateful that she had the courage to go ahead and search, because she had a rough time. It took her about 7 years to find her.
I want to answer your question. I'm sorry. I want to answer your question about what's good, and I think, to me, I found my son alive and well and happy a year and a half ago, and it's been a hell of a year and a very excited, happy year too. But I talk, and I read, and I bring up issues, and find myself educating, and I find all these things are really helping me to grieve. And I feel like what I need to do is embrace the grief constantly, and it's really helping. And like when a friend told me she was pregnant, I cried for 3 straight hours, and while I was crying, I was laughing and going, I know this is good to cry. And it was 2 weeks before my eyes were dry. And I reached out to Resolve, the national infertility thing, and asked them, do you know about the high infertility rate among birth mothers? And they said, yes, we do. Which is our rate of infertility, secondary, not having more kids, is 3 to 4 times the national rate. And they're thinking about doing a study program on this because, I mean, they're in the infertility field. And they also are pro-adoption, so it's like, it helps me thinking about educating so that this doesn't happen to happen to somebody else. And I really feel it's our responsibility to talk and tell
I really
and
didn't
diminish this.
understand about grieving when this was 36 that I placed her. So they didn't really talk, you just buried it. You didn't talk to anybody about it.
I think this is an excellent book called Ended Beginnings, Healing Childbearing Losses, and it deals with all kinds of things. This is by Claudia, I can never remember her last name, Catherine Romero. Came out about 5 years
I
ago.
read Silverman's Helping Women
Yeah.
Grieve after I was
I want to say to you
Is this book in the bookstore?
I ordered it from a birthing supply thing, but just to finish that up, they acknowledge that all losses around childbearing need to be grieved. Parents of stillborns are patted on the back, just have another child. They're terrified of having more kids until they've grieved the loss of that child. I found a lot of support for why we go on and have difficulty with relationships and why we don't have any other kids. We need to grieve, we need to acknowledge this, and that's the only way to move on.
Grief isn't over with.
No, I'm not saying it's not.
It's not over.
I'm not saying it's
When
not.
somebody dies, it's over with.
It's
I
not
think-
over,
but I
with.
think
Once
we put
it's
all
over,
three
it's
on
not
hold.
over. It's not over
When
with.
somebody dies, it's over with. With
It's not
us,
over.
it's not over with.
It's not over. I'm in agreement with you.
Exactly the point.
I see, but not talking about it means you bury yourself and you're not living and relating fully. But by, feeling my feelings and moving on, it means I can react to all these other things going on too.
And that's important.
I just want to have one comment to make. I know there's a lot of birth mothers here that never had other children, but along with it, there are a lot of us birth mothers who replace that child within a short period of time thinking, okay, I'm going to have another child and it's going to take its place. And so we put off grieving even further. And then on top of that, we compound it with, along with our self-esteem, horrible relationships. Because we don't know why we couldn't keep the child. You get yourself in bad relationships. I got myself in a marriage, replaced that child, of course, so I thought. And then got a divorce and proceeded to prove to my parents that I can raise a child on my own, not even realizing what I was doing. So this reflects in our relationships through our whole life. I can't tell you how many birth mothers I've talked to in bad marriages, relations.
How about, has anybody ever done a study on talking about pain? How I drowned my pain in the bottle. I'm a recovering
I have a
alcoholic.
friend who did.
And there's I have found in talking to a lot of birth mothers, when it kind of comes over, booze, oh, booze, booze, And a lot of, I'm going to call it acting out behavior. But a lot of women, after they have children and they surrender them, do act out in different ways. Alcohol, drugs, sexually. There's a lot of people that do this as a reaction to what's been done to them.
I took tranquilizers, Valium 3 times a day, at least a sleeping pill at night. Sometimes I'd get up in the morning and have another sleeping pill. I did this after I was married, and my husband, every time I had things were rocky or things, like, well, who's gotten pills? Why aren't you taking it? And we went on to have another child, a child between the two of us. Thought that would replace the loss, but of course it didn't, that. And 2 pregnancy losses after that. So, I think what happens often when we have another child, especially if we have a pregnancy that results in an ended, not completed pregnancy, that we then begin to re-grieve or start to grieve what we didn't grieve the first time. And every time we experience a loss subsequent to giving up a child in adoption, we're going to compound that grief, and if we don't work some of that through, well, we can end up being pretty bitter, angry women in our old age. And I saw the title of a book. I never read the book, but a couple of years ago, I noticed the title of a book called Don't Waste Your Sorrows. And I guess that's kind of how I see that I'm now putting my life into perspective. Not that I don't grieve anymore. I don't think we're ever going to be finished with grieving, but it's a journey of grief that we're in. And meeting together like this helps us to maybe only resolve one little part of an issue or a hurt, but it does begin the healing. And we can't always talk to those around us that we love so much and that were there when it was happening to us then. Because, yes, they were close to us, but they weren't close. They didn't feel our pain, or at least we don't think they did. So we don't really have that bond with them in the grief. But to meet together like this is helpful for me, and I think it is for all of us. And to do this in our communities wherever we can. And for those of us who have gone, I think, a little further along the path of recovering from the grief, or at least in some aspects where we're able to then reach out to others and help them to begin to heal. That's how I see myself as doing something productive with the grief that still remains and what I've completed along the journey. And so my work is with birth mothers. And I see my responsibility as someone who's been through this painful process to help them to sort out the issues, to help them to decide, okay, what are your reasons for possibly looking at adoption? What are your reasons for, even if they haven't opened their minds up to yet or expressed it, that you might possibly parent? Go through all those. What are any of those reasons, are any of those based on guilt? Are any of those based on fear? Are there any of those reasons based on what other people's expectations are of you? If so, then you better go through, cross all of those out. Then what are you left with? And I see that as my responsibility. As someone who's been a victim of the system that we were in, we can turn that anger, we can turn that frustration into something positive to help others. And I'm not there to say, don't place your child for adoption. I'm not there to say, keep your child, or any other option. But make sure that she has full information. Make sure that she isn't being pressured. Make sure that she has someone to walk along with her that's been that road before, that has felt the pain.
I wanted to say, when we were talking about something
Yes,
good,
and that's
good
a
things.
hard area. I'm not a social worker, but I do social work.
When we were talking about the good things, probably one of the most valuable things I've done in the last 23 years is get real close with other birth mothers and do things, not just once a month at the Cub meeting, but do things socially and become friends with them. And recently we had a get-together where there were a number of us in a room, and afterwards we all commented on what a good feeling that was. And I've got a lot of friends that love me dearly, but there's one little area that they do not understand. They really, really don't. It's hard. I mean, I've tried to educate them, and they are educated about it, but they, in their gut, they don't feel what it feels like. And it's so wonderful to have other friends that know exactly. I mean, it feels like they just love you without any reservation.
We
And
have that in New Jersey, we call it the Unwed Mothers Club. We meet for dinner, and, we share. It's nice, we just share. I think one thing.
We have that in Marin County.
Yeah, I think one thing else that, I didn't hear anybody say, but I think it's kind of important, because one thing I think that we do when we have our children is we put our grief on hold. And a lot of us women, when we first walk into these groups, and I see it a lot too, when we first walk in and we first put out our hand and we say, help, that's when we start grieving. And every other birth mother that's there is there to help you through the grief. We put our grief on hold for many years, and it manifests itself in many ways. But I think when we finally start putting ourselves together, sometimes we go off on a tangent, and I don't think we realize that, in fact, what we're doing is beginning to grieve the children we surrender. You know, I see that a lot with the women that come in. They always question their feelings, their motives, and why do I feel like this? Why don't I like this person? How come I liked my mother yesterday? I can't stand the bitch today, and everything else. And I think it's all just a natural process of working through all the issues and stuff that started to surface and then were just squashed. Because I think that another thing we have to accept is that regardless of how old we were when we had our children, whether we be 13, 14, 15, I was in a home with a woman in her 40s, all right? But whatever, at that point in time in our lives, a part of our lives stopped developing. And until we search and find our children, that part of our life is retarded. So when we walk in this room and we start to heal ourselves, we change because that piece that was left behind starts to grow and catches up with the rest of you. You know, through your grief, through your search and everything else, you find yourself. You don't resolve it, but you find yourself and you learn coping mechanisms, ways to get through each day.
And too, I think it's good to remind ourselves, I look around the room, and it's always so powerful to be in a group of women. It's kind of nice to be just women, and we're all workers, and we're terrific people.
Yes,
I mean,
every
we've
one of
come-
us is.
Look how far we've come.
Yes.
You know, and we're strong. We've made it through. I know sometimes it doesn't feel like it's like, oh my gosh, I'm not strong enough, but we are. I mean, I'm always amazed at the strength of Earth Mothers. I mean, look what we went through, and continue to go
And the
through.
categories we're put in. When
Yeah.
I told my younger daughter that I had surrendered a second child, and that was hard. I mean, who wants to say to a kid, hey, I not only surrendered you, but, you know, there's another one someplace. And when I told her, she knew, because the agency had told her that I told Louise today, a 13-year-old whore. Now, this 13-year-old whore is an executive secretary. I've got 4 other children. I'm the pillar of society, so to speak, you know, but this is what I was classified as, and we're not what they said we were.
And that's also the
Yeah,
other
you
thing,
were gonna
it's
say?
okay to turn
I just
around
wanted
and
to
to
say
go to
that-
other birth parents and to say, you know, to have this bond. But we have to unite to go to the educational problem of these social workers that come out of the schools, that don't know anything, they go into an agency. And then, and God help us if there's any social workers that will be here, all of you. But the problem is when they start, we're an adoptee going back to the agency, well, you don't want to know this, and you're ungrateful, and you're this. We have to educate them, to teach them how we feel, so they don't make the same mistakes with future birth parents.
Very good point. We
My
had a,
first son is older sister is a social worker, and I took an extra one of these pamphlets to send her at her school right now. So, you know, Xerox a copy of it and send it to somebody, you know.
I would just like to
trying to
say,
say something.
When it gets really, really frustrating, you know, and you take all these things internally, the way that I react to them is to go out and try to educate everybody that I touch every day, you know, and start with the babysitter to the person you meet on the street to somebody in church, and pretty soon just you yourself have blossomed out and educated a whole lot of people who in turn will educate more. And I think if we kind of do that, then we can channel our energies there while we're doing the healing process with them.
Okay. Okay, we'll take one more.
I'm a birth mother and a social worker, and the reason I went into social work was because the social worker in my home was not what I thought somebody should be, so I did a lot of educating with my colleagues, but there's a lot who just still don't understand.
They don't, and I might bring up one little point. I have an institute doctor. My brother is a psychologist, my adopted brother. They have not told her she's adopted, and they refuse to. I mean, this is exactly what I'm talking about education. And he was from a big hospital here in Illinois, and naturally, Auntie got as much information as I could, that when that child becomes of age, she will have it. And my brother to this day says, oh yeah, we'll tell her. You know, it's the education back where it starts.
Before we close, is there anybody who hasn't spoken that wants to say something, or, you know, anybody that's got something they really want to throw out?
Quickly,
in looking for ways to find my own grief, I hit upon the idea that I've never held a baby. And I met a woman who volunteers her time to tend border babies in a nearby hospital. And when she said that, I just got goosebumps. I thought, that's what I have to do. That's my next step. So if I can summon up the courage, I'm going to sign up to go hold these babies. And one day I was talking to her and I said, well, how are your babies Sunday? And she said, oh, they were fine. I changed 23 diapers. My God, I don't know how to change a diaper.
They trained you.
Yes.
They put you through an orientation.
Oh, some of you have done that.
Going along with that, I'm going to kind of reunite with my brother, who I haven't seen in 16 years, and he's here in Chicago. And one of the reasons is because he has 7 or 8 kids, and she was my only child. And I just haven't been able to even look at those kids because of that. And I've never held a baby, and I don't think I've ever really looked into the face of a tiny baby. So that felt good to hear that. And I think I need to do that too.
I'd like to just say that we need to be thinking, we're all here sharing a lot of history. And I'd like to see all of us go back and do something for someone that's pregnant today. Because if we don't support them, that support that we were missing, care for, this is just going to go on
Keep repeating
and
itself.
on.
Yeah.
How do you recommend helping someone?
Well, I take birth moms into my house and have them stay with me. And that's one way. I'm starting a mentor program for teen moms. And we're not going to financially support them, but we're going to have adult people who have jobs, who have grown children perhaps that might have some expertise in how to fix something, make a 5 to 10 year commitment with this young woman so she can keep this kid. Because we have to do that. This society's got to stop this bullshit and quit playing games. And we've got all given it lip service. It's got to start here because you all seem to feel like...
I did that with a young woman. For 2 years she was in that in my home.
I've got another idea that you can do. This is something, I'm a social work student. I just got my bachelor's, I'm working on my master's, and my dream was to someday run a home for single moms and their babies. Last week, I got a job working for Catholic Charities running a home for single moms and their babies. And all the women at Cub are just chomping at the bit to help. And I mean, we've got so many ideas. Yeah, I mean, and that to me is a real, I mean, I'm so
Try and
excited.
break
I
the
can hardly
cycle.
stand it. Yes, yes.
And of course, getting out and keeping women from getting pregnant. That's the key. Going out there and I teach sex education and my kids don't leave without knowing, a classroom. That not only can there ways to prevent pregnancy, but they also have power over themselves and they can make decisions for themselves and they don't even have to have sex unless that's their choice.
This marks the end of session 40. Thank you.